was born Lafayette Ronald Hubbard on March 13, 1911 in Tilden, Nebraska. He spent his formative years in a rough and tumble Helena, Montana, where he rode barely broken range broncs at the age of 3 1/2. As his mother was that rarity of her time, a thoroughly educated woman, he was also reading well beyond his years. Philosophy, science, and the pillars of Western literature, all in an effort to satisfy a rare and abiding curiosity. As his father was a United States naval officer, he was further afforded a then rare opportunity to travel, crisscrossing America's diverse communities in the teens of the 20th century. At the age of 12, he entered the Boy Scouts, first leading his troop to victory in a regional scout advancement competition, then representing scouting to United States President Calvin Coolidge. But it was his 21 merit badges that most distinguished L. Ron Hubbard at this juncture of his life. For just days beyond his 13th birthday, he became the youngest Eagle Scout in American history. It was another distinction entirely, however, that set him on the first leg of his life's course. Specifically, when an American naval officer who had studied under Sigmund Freud introduced young L. Ron Hubbard to the theories of psychoanalysis. Although left with many unanswered questions, here was the moment when his enduring interest in unraveling the mysteries of the human mind was born. His father's naval career provided the next avenue of inquiry. In particular, a Far East assignment, allowing the 16-year-old L. Ron Hubbard a chance to visit Asia. It was land still steeped in mystery and rarely seen by Westerners, yet pursuing very fundamental questions on the origins of man and the ultimate source of life. He trekked more than 250,000 miles through India, China, Japan, and the Philippines, into many remote cultures and much arcane wisdom, including Vedic hymns, at the root of mankind's oldest beliefs. It was also through these travels he gained entrance to forbidden Buddhist lamaseries in China's western hills, and there witnessed wonders beyond any known scientific explanation. Shortly after his return to the United States in 1929, he entered George Washington University as an engineering student. It was a rigorous curriculum of scientific methodology, the very tools he needed to examine human thinking with unerring accuracy. Here, too, was one of America's earliest classes on nuclear physics, through which he embarked on yet another investigatory trail, this one to isolate a postulated life source, theoretically detectable in small energy particles. Yet laboratory experimentation was by no means all that occupied his university days. Beginning in June of 1932, he organized the first of several expeditions to remote and primitive lands. Initially, a 5,000-mile voyage into the Caribbean, where he mingled with a people predating Columbus by at least 10 centuries. Next came Puerto Rico, where he not only conducted one of the island's first complete mineralogical surveys, but also studied yet another ancient culture deep within the hinterland. Then, taking his thirst for adventure to the skies, he became America's 385th licensed glider pilot. Heralded by newspapers of the day as Flash Hubbard for his aerial antics, while as a barnstorming sensation of powered flight across rural America, he mixed with still another slice of society. Then, leaving university in the depths of the Great Depression, he began his career as a professional author, turning his true-to-life exploits into high-action tales for magazines of the day. Tales of adventure, tales of intrigue, science fiction, fantasies, westerns, and even the occasional romance. As an undisputed legend of American pulp fiction, L. Ron Hubbard wrote it all. Indeed, with more than 300 novels and novelettes to his credit, so prodigious was his output, he was eventually authoring stories under 15 pen names, and so filling whole magazines with his work. He was also scripting matinee blockbusters for Hollywood, and otherwise leaving an indelible stamp as an author whose career would span 50 years. Then, just as exploits fueled story ideas, so his stories funded still more exploration, until he was regularly crisscrossing the country to live extreme adventures and mix with people as far afield as Native American tribes along the Alaskan Panhandle. In recognition of discoveries in the field, he was further honored with a place in the prestigious and invitation-only Explorers Club, and so went on to captain expeditions beneath 3 club flags. But the real point of such adventures was the fact he was mixing with life to fathom life. The first decisive breakthrough came in 1937, when he isolated the single common denominator between all living things, a dynamic principle of existence. It was recorded in a manuscript entitled Excalibur, and presented the basis for all future research into the mind and source of life. But then came an interruption to that research, the Second World War. As he had since earned a rare Master Mariner's license to captain any vessel in any ocean, he received numerous recommendations for commission as a naval officer. In particular, he was described discreet, loyal, honest, and without peer in the art of getting things done. So it was, Lieutenant L. Ron Hubbard commanded warships in both the Atlantic and Pacific. He was highly decorated for duties under fire, and into the service in a military hospital where he was treated for wounds suffered in combat. But that's also where he embarked on his final road of discovery. Working with injured servicemen who had failed to recover despite intensive medical care, he began employing all he had learned through the previous decades, spiritual principles from the East, as well as scientific methodologies from the West. What he then discovered were mental factors inhibiting recovery and preventing medicines from taking effect. And when in fact those mental blocks were addressed, the medicine began to work, and patients swiftly returned to health. He then continued refining procedures on people from all walks of life, actors and writers in Hollywood's film community, street gang members whom he treated as a special officer with the LAPD, even deeply troubled patients at a Georgia institution. And so it was, having developed a workable technology of the mind, he authored a definitive text on the subject, a work detailing all underlying theory, discoveries, and techniques. That book was Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health, published on May 9th, 1950. It sparked a storm of popular enthusiasm and wrote bestseller lists for 100 consecutive weeks. As such, it was the biggest selling book on the mind ever written, and remains so today. Contained within was the discovery of the reactive mind, the hidden source of nightmares, unreasonable fears, upsets, and insecurity. Yet L. Ron Hubbard never considered Dianetics an end to his research, but rather a stepping stone to the discovery and isolation of that long elusive life source. And indeed, the techniques of Dianetics provided the means by which practitioners soon began discovering past lives. Pressing application and research even further came the accomplishment of what is known as exteriorization, demonstrating the spirit was indeed separable from the body and mind. The Scientology religion was born. Thereafter, L. Ron Hubbard delved ever deeper into the spiritual nature of man, documenting his discoveries in thousands of recorded lectures, articles, and books. While to present those discoveries, he literally circumnavigated the globe, and so churches of Scientology opened on 4 continents, headquartered at his long-term residence in southern England. Through ensuing years, L. Ron Hubbard continued advancing the subject until his passing in 1986. His legacy comprises tens of millions of published words and 3,000 recorded lectures. While with over 300 million copies of his books and lectures in circulation, he has inspired a movement spanning all continents and all cultures. So to those who would ask, what kind of man could have founded the only major religion of the 20th century? The answer is simple enough. A man who lived life from the top down and the bottom up. A man who had seen much wisdom and great suffering. A man who spent a quarter of a century bridging the gap between East and West, science and religion. A man such as L. Ron Hubbard.
I was raised in Montana. My grandfather had a ranch up there. It was very interesting that nobody up there had much of a conviction about non-survival. Big country, lots of space, new people, more or less pioneer area, and that somebody would get killed just didn't quite occur to anybody. You know, they had a certain savoir-faire, a certain go-to-hell feeling on the subject of existence at large, and honest, as an expression of life, you could hardly believe that anybody would have this attitude about existence. An incredible attitude. It just doesn't take anything very seriously, you know? Death and disease and getting shot, crawling 12 miles with a hole in your back and that sort of thing. It's a joke. A fellow would get half killed on these jokes. Never occurred to anybody this was serious, even the fellow. He'd just get down and get his broken leg healed up. He'd get back again. He'd break somebody's back for it. You know, big laugh. Well, when life gets so serious that it becomes completely intolerable, it of course becomes very funny. Because nothing can be that bad. My grandfather actually dragged me around this country before it had any roads. He was driving a Model T Ford. It had the most wonderful ability to go totally cross-country. Somebody nailed, I think, a half a dozen signs up on trees, tin signs saying the Lincoln Trail and so forth out west, and that was supposed to be a road. It was quite interesting. You'd run across motors that had been there for 2 months waiting for a wagon to get back from town, some freight outfit or something to bring back a carburetor or a new tire or something. You went 30 miles to a blowout. That was usually what it averaged. An old car, if you saw somebody else stop alongside of the road, you stopped. Well, this was participation in the game of motoring.
I met one of the great men of Freudian analysis, Commander Thompson. He was a very great man, explorer. And this man was responsible for a great many discoveries out through the world, but he was also interested in the human mind. And his name, as I said, was Thompson. He was commander of the United States Navy, and his enemies all called him Crazy Thompson, and his friends called him Snake Thompson. He was usually in very bad odor with the Navy Department. He was rather looked down on, but he was a personal friend of Sigmund Freud's. He had no boys of his own, and when he saw me, a defenseless character, and there was nothing to do on a big transport on a very long cruise, he started to work me over. What impressed me, he had a cat with the name of Psycho. This cat had a crooked tail, which is enough to impress any young man. And the cat would do tricks. And the first thing he did to me was teach me how to train cats. But it takes so long, and it requires such tremendous patience, that to this day I have never trained a cat. You have to wait, evidently, for the cat to do something, then you applaud it. But waiting for a cat to do something whose name is Psycho. Anyway, at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., where they have all the books on everything, he started shoving my nose into an education in the field of the mind. Now, that's a very unusual thing to do, to take a boy and start doing something with the mind. But he really got me interested in the subject, up to the point where I was pretty sure that Freud didn't know what he was talking about. But actually, Commander Thompson had a very open mind on this, and he used to tell me, well, if it's not true for you, it's not true. And I found out that he got this from a fellow named Gautama Siddhartha. Now, you really don't know Gautama Siddhartha as a man, but that's all he was, because better than 2/3 of the world population now considers him a god. But the first thing that Gautama Siddhartha ever said about his own work was that he was just a man. This he tried to make very plain.
And the other lesson back there about 600 BC that he taught everyone is that it isn't true for you. It isn't true. Probably the first time that statement was ever made in this rather didactic universe. I find it's a very good statement. It agreed with my own personal philosophy very well, because if there's anybody in the world that's calculated to believe what he wants to believe and to reject what he doesn't want to believe, it is I. I spent quite a bit of time in the Orient when I was a kid. In those days, the conduct of the American tourist was so flagrant. He grabbed these people out of school, you know, and threw them into uniform. He himself had been all but crippled with a bayonet in his guts at Gallipoli. But anyway, this man, by reason of having been an invalid for a long time and so forth, had increased double return to his studies, you might say, and here he was in charge of British Secret Service in the vicinity of North China, in that area. But this fellow was evidently essentially very lonely, none of the whites. And this book says it's the history of the world. You find yourself reading about the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans and the French, and then your own country, and where are you? You've read the history of the world 1,000 years ago, and we pay no attention to it. In Asia, I saw a great many, and have seen a great many things which you would call miracles. And I could not put these things from my mind. I have seen such things as 8 matches floating in a bowl of water being made to drill by an individual who simply looked at them. He actually looked at these 8 matches floating in a bowl and would rack them up just by looking at them, so that they made an orderly line, one line, and then make them all turn sideways so that they looked like a picket fence, and then make them form something that looked like a star. Intriguing, to say the least. A parlor trick, yet it was very impressive. But here in the East, we find a tradition of wisdom. And it was that thing more than anything else which came through to me when I was quite young. A tradition of wisdom, the freedom to think. The freedom to be an individual, to be as eccentric as one pleases, and to lie down and die if it struck one as that was the thing to do. I have seen men lying on the street, starving to death. I've seen them receive a broken leg in an accident. To thinking in terms of rituals and Zen Buddhism, and talking about the possibilities of this or that, and hereafters and nirvanas and so on. This was all quite common and ordinary to me, and I came back to America. This was a great shock. It's probably something I never should have done. I probably should have stayed abroad. As a matter of fact, until I was 30, I used to think about it periodically and curse myself in every language I could curse in. I know a lot of curses in a lot of languages. And it seemed to me the most idiotic thing I had ever done was return to the Western world. Mostly because there was no intellect. Took the New York Regents and entered directly into engineering school. And when I arrived, I was stunned to discover that no one cared whether I thought or not. And it was inconceivable to me that an education could be carried forward anywhere by simply the relay of data. If one never invited anybody to think and never permitted any allowance for thought, how possibly could one ever become educated? I had an entirely different definition for education than those who were doing educating. And I wrote a theme on this subject. I had heard that there was the longest sentence in the English language was 289 words, so I wrote a 500-word sentence which merely said this:
And when you go on that long with only one and one but, no semicolons, it begins to build up a considerable velocity.
First class in nuclear physics. We call it atomic and molecular phenomena then, of which nuclear physics, by the way, is only one small part. It was not a speculation. Atomic and molecular phenomena is simply no more, no less than what do electrons and the nuclei and so forth do when you do something to them. But this whole subject was being grooved down, not by anybody's choice or selection, to a very forceful study of splitting the atom. And the splitting of the atom was at that time fact.